I said I don't want my usual. My wife is dead. The words came sharp enough to slice the morning open. Fawkes paused mid-air. A busser froze with a tub against his hip. The Tuesday rush at the Bluebird Diner, sun leaking through big windows on Haywood Road in Asheville, North Carolina, went quiet as if someone had pressed a palm over the town's heartbeat. Before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories like this one. Graham Whitaker stood at the counter in a suit that fit like an apology, crisp and dark, a colour he'd adopted after the funeral. He was the kind of man the local business section liked to photograph next to ribbon cuttings and hospital donors' walls. Today, his tie was slightly crooked, the knot drawn by a hand that hadn't slept. He stared at the plate the waitress had set down, 2 eggs over medium, wheat toast, hash browns scattered and crisp, a wedge of grapefruit, and felt heat flood his chest. "I'm sorry, sir," the waitress said, voice unsteady but steadying. She had a name tag that read Ruby in blue marker and a stray curl escaping the red bandana in her hair. You thought wrong," Graham snapped. "You don't know what you're doing." The bell over the door jingled as more customers came in, took one look, and chose the far booths. The cook, a big guy with forearms inked in swirls, lifted his eyes briefly from the griddle. A slim woman in the corner fiddled with a sugar packet, pretending not to watch. Ruby's freckled knuckles tightened around the coffee pot like she was holding a warm stone against a chill she couldn't explain. Graham could feel himself behaving badly and couldn't stop it. Grief is a riptide. 1 minute you're knee-deep, the next you're 6 yards out, swallowing foam and salt. The plate blinked at him the way grief does, like a trick of light. Eggs over medium had been Lila's thing, the breakfast she'd convinced him tasted like patience. The toast crusts were the exact shade she'd teased him for preferring. The diner smelled like citrus and butter and a small-town morning. In that smell, for half a second, it was months ago and she was alive. "Sir," Ruby tried again, softer, "I can take it back." He reached for his wallet and slapped a 50 on the counter. "No, I'll take the coffee. Keep the rest." Ruby's face flickered, not offense, something like hurt, then resolve. She poured the coffee anyway, careful to angle the pot so the stream wouldn't splash. "It's not about the money," she said. "Someone asked us to—" "No one asked you," Graham said, his voice dropping to something low and dangerous, the kind of tone that closed deals and ended arguments. "No one who matters anymore." He wanted to be anywhere else. At his office on Biltmore Avenue where numbers behaved, or back in the house with its crooked porch light, where the silence at least knew his name. He took the stool at the end of the counter because habit yanked him there, and the coffee tasted like every morning he'd ever survived, hot and plain and almost enough. Ruby didn't move. She slid the plate 2 inches closer. "Mr. Whitaker," he said reluctantly. The town knew. Of course it did. Asheville tended to float news on the French Broad River until everyone had fished the same story from the water: the accident, the wet road, the wrong turn, the ambulance that screamed through a night that never ended. "Mr. Whitaker," Ruby said, "I'm new to speaking up to people in suits, but this isn't random. We didn't guess. When anyone asked for your usual, I didn't even know what that meant. I learned last week. I swear, I'm just trying to do what who told you?" His jaw clenched. Ruby's eyes flicked to the space beneath the register, then back to him like she was checking with a ghost. "Your wife," she said, almost a whisper. "Lila." The sound of her name did something to the room. A light blinked. The ice machine clicked and dumped. The cook dropped a spatula. Graham's stomach hollowed out as if someone had pulled a drawer from his middle and left it open to the air. "Don't," he said, but it came out as a plea. Ruby looked like she wanted to step back and couldn't. "I didn't know her well. I started here in June. She came in on a Thursday before my shift. The owner, Marta was in the office, so your wife asked me instead. She said she'd be traveling for treatment again. Ruby paused, choosing the right shape for the next truth. She asked if we could make sure you didn't forget to eat, said you'd pretend coffee was a meal if someone let you. The plate wobbled in Graham's eyesight. He squeezed the counter's metal edge and felt the groove of the seam under his palm, the world breaking into details because details were safer than the total thing. She left a note, Ruby added, handwritten. She said you'd know it was hers. In the booth by the window, a kid drummed a butter knife on his water glass until his mom stilled his hand. Outside, a city bus exhaled and shouldered back into traffic. The diner's neon hum threaded through it all. Graham's throat tightened around 1,000 refusals. This is a mistake. You've confused me with someone else. Lila would never, but each objection died in the same place. The memory of Lila's handwriting, all loops and precise slants, a dancer's patience in ink. "Show me," he said. Ruby glanced toward the office door where Marta, the owner's son, was on the phone, gesturing at invoices. She hesitated, then reached under the counter. There was a metal cash box taped to the inside wall, the kind that made a thunk when you opened it. From a narrow gap beside it, Ruby slid out a folded recipe card, edges softened with handling. A smudge of grapefruit pulp stained one corner, as if the card had been near someone's breakfast, someone's morning. She didn't unfold it right away. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, voice low enough that the cups on their hooks leaned in. "I'm not trying to make you feel worse. I promised her we'd do this gently. She was very specific about gently, and she made me promise, like eyes on mine, hand over heart." Ruby exhaled. "I don't break promises." Graham felt something old and private tighten in his chest, Lila's way of extracting promises with a smile. Lila's belief that the world could be held together by the tiny threads people tied between them. He stared at Ruby's hands, their carefulness, the faint pink line across one knuckle where a plate must have nicked her. He nodded once. Ruby unfolded the card. The first line was a greeting to people Lila had called the Bluebird family, and the second line was his name, written the way she always wrote it when she meant softness, Graham with the G taller than the rest, like a gate opening. Each letter was a small homecoming. The diner went fuzzy at the edges. Ruby blinked quickly, as if holding herself in place. "It says, if Graham comes in alone." She swallowed, eyes tracking the lines as if they might move. "Please serve him his usual. Tell him it's on me." The air moved in his lungs but didn't feel like breathing. He braced himself for the rest, for whatever she had dared to put in ink for strangers to deliver. The coffee steamed up between them, a threadbare curtain. The room leaned closer, and what Ruby read next, what Lila had chosen as the last ordinary mercy of love, did not say what anyone expected. "Would you like me to continue with the next part?" Você disse. "Ok. Criador de roteiro em inglês disse. Continue exactly where you stopped. Briefly recall the last two lines and keep the same tone. Block 2, the note, the stranger's mercy, and a promise. Please serve him as usual. Tell him it's on me." And then, what Ruby read next, what Lila had chosen as the last ordinary mercy of love, did not say what anyone expected. Ruby steadied the card with both hands, as if the ink might slide off if she breathed too hard. "It says, if he protests, tell him I argued with him in advance and won. He'll hate that." The ghost of Lila's humor warmed the chilly space between words. "If he asks who you are to make decisions for him, say you're the person I chose because you look like someone who notices when the coffee burns." A couple in the corner let out a soft laugh they tried to swallow. Graham stared at the looping letters as though touching them might collapse the room. Beneath the first paragraph came the part Ruby had hesitated over. She writes, "Please don't tell him I planned for this because I was dying. Tell him I planned it because I was living. I love him. He needs breakfast when I can't be there to talk him into it. 2 eggs over medium, wheat toast, hash browns crisp, grapefruit if it's sweet. If he looks wrecked, give him the corner booth by the window. If he looks angry, give him the end stool and let him be. Either way, remind him he's not alone." Ruby's voice thinned at the last word. The card trembled. Graham reached for it and stopped halfway, as if the note might shock him. "There's more," Ruby said. She cleared her throat. "He'll try to pay you back. Tell him he already did, the day he taught a kid at the bus stop how to fold a paper airplane. He doesn't remember, but the kid does." Graham blinked at her. "That happened." His voice wore sandpaper. Ruby nodded. "My little brother, 2 summers ago. Same suit, different tie." Her lips tugged upward, then steadied. "Your plane landed on the back of a city bus. He still brags about the trajectory." The diner seemed to tilt a degree toward tenderness. Marta, the owner, finally hung up her call and approached, a dish rag slung over one shoulder, silver hair pinned with 2 bobby pins that didn't match. "Graham," she said softly, as if the syllables were porcelain. "I was going to tell you myself." Lila made a tab. "She asked us to keep it quiet unless you made a fuss." Marta's eyes were briny, but her voice was firm. "Don't take away her last bossy kindness." Graham swallowed against the ache that turned every breath into a negotiation. "How long? How much?" "A book's worth of breakfasts," Marta said, "and a donation to cover anyone who looks like they're counting coins before ordering." She insisted. She angled her head at Ruby. "She recruited my rookie here as the courier." Ruby flushed. "She said I looked stubborn enough to do it right." Graham's grip on the counter loosened. The shape of Lila, her wit, her bossiness, the way she repurposed ordinary spaces into sanctuaries, rose like steam from the coffee cup. He put his hand out. Ruby placed the card in his palm. The paper was warm from her fingers and citrus-scented, as if the words themselves had been peeled from a rind. "Mr. Whitaker," Ruby said, back in her waitress voice, because that was how people survived in public. "How about the corner booth? Grapefruit is actually sweet this morning. I checked." He slid from the stool, suddenly ashamed of how he'd spoken. "I was cruel," he said. "I'm sorry." Ruby looked startled, then relieved. "Grief is loud," she said. "We can hear you even when you whisper." She led him to the corner booth Lila had designated for wreckage. Sunlight pooled there like a patient dog. Ruby set down the plate with an attentiveness more ceremony than service. "There's a peas," she added, tapping the bottom of the card. "I didn't read it aloud because it felt private." Graham's eyes dropped. There, in smaller letters, Lila had added, "Tell him not to overcook the future. He tends to. And if he makes it to the grapefruit, look under the wedge." He stared at the plate like it might detonate. Under the grapefruit wedge. He had not thought there would be a treasure map in his breakfast. He wanted to laugh and weep in the same breath. He lifted the fork. The food looked like any food, and also like a door. He took a bite because obedience to the dead sometimes felt like a way to keep them. The yolk was the exact softness he liked. The heat kissed his tongue. The salt restrained. Ruby watched him, the way you watch a person step onto a fragile bridge. Around them, the diner restarted its quiet symphony. Orders called, glasses clinked, sunlight inching across Formica. A teenage boy eased past the booth to gawk at the city philanthropist eating plain as any man. Graham caught his reflection in the window. The suit, the sleepless eyes, the posture a notch too proud. He wasn't sure who he resented more, people who treated him like he might break, or people who expected him to perform strength on cue. He reached for the grapefruit. It shone like a small sun. The wedge bled pink into the white plate. He lifted it carefully and found a napkin folded to the size of a matchbox, held shut with a strip of blue painter's tape. On the tape, in Lila's impatient scrawl, "Open, no overthinking." His hands shook. He peeled the tape. Inside was a tiny key, brass, simple, with a tag from a hardware store that read 17 on one side and Bluebird in ballpoint on the other. There was also a second scrap of paper, torn from the edge of something. Ruby hovered, breath held. Marta had moved closer too, pretending to refill ketchup. Graham unfolded the scrap. "Lock her in back," Ruby supplied, cheeks pink. "We use them to stash personal stuff during shifts." Graham read the note. 5 words, no more. "Ask Marta for box Lila." Marta was already fishing beneath the register. She drew out a metal recipe tin, the floral kind grandmothers keep. The label on the front, written in Lila's hand, read "For when the world is too much." Marta set it down as if it might bite. "She told me to wait for the day you told someone you couldn't taste anything," she said gently. "You said that when you walked in." Graham exhaled a laugh that wasn't a laugh. "I did." "Then it's time," Marta said. Ruby slid into the opposite side of the booth without asking, an audacity softened by kindness. "If you want," she said. "Or I can go wipe down condiments and pretend I don't want to know." He nodded for her to stay. He lifted the tin's lid. Inside, a stack of index cards in Lila's looping script, a faded photo of them on the Blue Ridge Parkway, wind making a joke of their hair, a key identical to the one under his grapefruit, and tucked at the very bottom, a sealed envelope marked, "Read only after a full breakfast." No cheating, Whitaker. The ache in his chest widened to make room for air and pain at once. He ate, one bite and another, because love sometimes sounded like instructions, and he'd promised to listen. Ruby didn't speak, but her quiet was a kind of conversation. The diner held its ordinary shape around the extraordinariness happening in one corner. Halfway through the hash browns, the bell over the door rang, and a man in a slate blazer stepped in, scanning the room with the practiced gaze of someone used to entering places like a verdict. He spotted Graham, waved a tight hello, and made a beeline. "Whitaker," he said, breathless, "finally, we need to talk about the South Slope project. The board wants to pivot and—" He noticed the box, the note, Ruby's damp eyes. He smiled the kind of smile that wasn't a smile. "Ah, personal time. Didn't realize we were doing nostalgia at breakfast." Graham's jaw set. The man, Colin, his operations chief, didn't lower his voice. "Look, I know you're processing, but this is millions. We can't stall because of a diner and a—" He waved vaguely at Ruby. "Domestic scene." Marta's eyebrows rose. Ruby went very still. Lila's envelope lay under Graham's hand, a weight and a dare. He remembered the P.S. "Don't overcook the future." He heard his own voice from earlier, cruel with a stranger. He could be that man, or he could be the one Lila had written breakfast maps for. He set down his fork and looked at Colin, then at Ruby, then at the keys. "We'll discuss the project at 10, he said evenly. "Not now," Colin scoffed. "We're losing leverage." Graham's gaze didn't waver. "Then we're learning patience." Colin opened his mouth to argue, then shut it at the look in Graham's eyes. He left with a huff, the bell sputtering complaint. Silence refilled the booth. Ruby exhaled a laugh this time. "You just told a man in a slate blazer to wait." "He'll survive," Graham said. He finished the hash browns. He lifted the envelope, hands steadier. He slid a finger under the seal and pulled out the letter that waited there like a lifeboat. And the first line, just 5 words on a page, changed everything he thought he knew. "Would you like me to continue with the next part?" Você disse. "Ok. Criador de roteiro em inglês disse. Pensou por 23, block 3, the letter, the pivot, and a clock. Ticking, the flap sighed open, paper rasped like a match being struck, and there, in Lila's clean, decisive hand, 5 words: "Stop the South Slope Project." Graham stilled. The diner's hum fell away until the only sound was the drag of his breath. He read the line again, as if repetition might change its meaning. It didn't. Beneath it, Lila had written, "You love building things, so do I. But not everything that can be built should be." While I was in Charlotte for treatment, Marta drove me to see the streets South Slope will erase, the daycares tucked behind breweries, the rental above a bar where Ruby's mom keeps 3 jobs running on pure kindness, the community garden that grows kale like stubborn hope. You promised me, on our porch, remember, that if I ever asked you to choose people over profit, you'd listen. This is me asking. His mouth went dry. The South Slope Project, his firm's crown jewel, the pivot Colin had come to push, stretched across 10 acres of warehouses and low-slung homes, promising glass and steel and donors' names on plaques. He had told himself it would bring jobs and polish. He had not watched the quiet lights it would put out. He had not seen the garden. Lila's letter continued. "I made you a map because grief steals direction. The keys unlock more than one thing. Locker 17 at the Bluebird holds a small start. Names, numbers, a deed option you forgot you still control. You once taught me that leverage can help or harm. Use it to help. If you can't do it for strangers, do it because the girl with the red bandana noticed when my hands shook and didn't pretend not to see." Ruby, opposite him, pressed her lips together, eyes bright. She told me not to get in your face," Ruby said, apology and resolve braided in her voice. "But also not to let you hide." He kept reading. "I set aside money, quietly, when you started talking towers, not to fight you, to give you a softer place to land if you changed your mind. Marta has the documents. There's a community land trust downtown. The folks at the church on South French Broad can introduce you to Mrs. Alvarez and Mr. Connor. They'll speak fast. Listen faster. If Colin blusters, tell him your wife said the word no is holy." The next paragraph softened, became them again. "You always overcook the future, Whitaker. You aim for done when done is ruin. Aim for tender. Aim for time. Eat your breakfast. Yes, even the grapefruit. And then go to locker 17. There's a second envelope there marked Neighbors. Take Ruby if she's on break. She's braver than she thinks." He felt absurd. A man in a perfect suit unraveling under fluorescent lights, and a letter that knew the shape of his stubborn. The ache in his chest flickered with a new heat. Anger, not at Lila, but at the parts of himself that had made it necessary for her to write like this. He read the last line on the page, small and fierce. "You did not save me. You can still save something." A shadow crossed the booth. Marta stood with a hand on the recipe tin, as if anchoring it to the table. "There's a P.S. in the back of the stack," she said. "She made me promise to give it to you if your jaw did that thing where you decide to fight the entire world in an hour." He managed a sound that could have been a laugh. She handed him a second card. Lila's voice leapt up from it again. "You have until noon today." The clock over the grill read 10:12. "Until noon for what?" Graham asked. Marta tapped the tin. "That deed option, the affordable parcel behind the old battery shop. It expires at noon if you don't exercise it. It's the keystone the land trust needs to keep the block from tipping." Graham's heart punched his ribs. He had signed a dozen of those options in his life. This one he'd filed and forgotten. Lila had not. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, the question soft, not an accusation. "Because she said you'd show up exactly when you were ready to," Marta replied, voice gentle as a hand on a fevered forehead. And because if I'd told you before the letter did, you'd have called your lawyer, not your conscience. Ruby slid out of the booth. Locker 17 is in the back hallway, she said. I can cover my section for 10 minutes. Rosa owes me a favor. She hesitated. Or I can stay. Whatever you want. He looked at the envelope, at the tin, at the grapefruit rind like a crescent moon on his plate. He looked at Ruby, nerves alive in her fingers and steadiness in her spine. Come, he said. They cut through the diner's narrow back passage where a bulletin board sagged with flyers. Lost cats, a poetry night, a notice about a tenants' meeting. The staff lockers were metal squares, paint-chipped and stubbornly cheerful in a row of blues. 17 wore its number with a slight tilt, like a grin kept straight only by effort. Graham slipped the brass key into the lock. The click was shockingly loud. Inside, on the top shelf, lay a manila folder stamped in Lila's loop title, Neighbors. Beneath it, a thumb drive, another small key with a tag that read Storage 312 and a photograph. He took the picture first. Lila stood at the center of a small crowd in front of a mural he hadn't noticed before, hands of many shades holding up a bluebird. Ruby was there, hair a different color, holding a tray aloft as if offering the mural to the sky. Marta had her arm around a woman Graham didn't know, a compact grandmother with eyes like flint. Off to one side, uncomfortably out of place even in a candid shot, stood Colin, his expression tight, his eyes on Lila instead of the mural. On the back, in Lila's hand, the day I decided to fight for the block you keep calling blighted. Ruby peered over his shoulder. That was 5 months ago, she said softly. Ms. Alvarez organized it after a landlord tried to triple rents. Lila stood in the rain, telling us the law couldn't be a shadow, only rich people walked in. Graham's stomach sank. He slid the photograph back into the locker and opened the folder. Inside, a checklist in Lila's precise script. Call Miss Alvarez, number circled. Exercise deed option by 12 Carpi, Imshem, form attached. Marta can notarize. Wire seed funds to land trust, instructions enclosed. Tell Colin to pause all demo permits. If he threatens to quit, let him. He'll come back or he won't. Either way, you'll sleep. Stapled to the form was a copy of the option agreement with a bright orange sticky note. You signed this on our anniversary. Show off. Use that swagger for something decent. He read fast, the way people read evacuation maps. Ruby, he said, voice tight with propulsion. Can you ask Marta for her notary stamp? Ruby nodded and bolted like a runner who'd finally heard the gun. He pulled out the thumb drive, labeled in Lila's pen, press kit in case you need light. He didn't need to plug it in to know what she'd done. Photos, testimonies, a story larger than one man's decision. A memory rose, uninvited, their porch in early spring, Lila's head on his shoulder, her voice small and fierce. Promise me you won't confuse big with good. He had kissed her hair and said, I promise. Promises, he was learning, were not words, but weights. Ruby returned, cheeks flushed, Marta on her heels with a notary kit and a steadiness that calmed the air. Ms. Alvarez is on line 2 by the register, Marta said. She says she'll be here in 20 if you want a witness who scares men in ties. Graham almost smiled. He filled the form with a hand that remembered how to move decisively when it mattered. He signed, Marta notarized. Ruby exhaled, a tremor leaving her shoulders. The clock rolled to 10:41. He reached back into the locker, fingers closing around the smaller key labeled Storage 312. A sticky note clung to it. For after, because you will keep going. He pocketed it like a vow. They stepped into the light of the diner again, everything in the room exactly the same and entirely altered. In the front window, the mural's reflection, hands holding a bluebird, seemed to be lifting the whole place. Graham's phone buzzed. Colin. Bored, impatient. Need answer. Another text followed, a photo of a glossy rendering. Towers, glass, a park that looked like a brochure's idea of joy. He set the phone face down. His eyes went to the diner door. A woman stood there, compact, eyes like flint, raincoat folded over her arm though the day was clear. Ms. Alvarez, time contracted around her presence. She stepped forward, took in Graham, the papers, the tin. So, she said, voice even and edged. Are you the man who's going to be a neighbor or a headline? Graham opened his mouth to answer, and from behind Ms. Alvarez the bell chimed again, and a figure he hadn't expected in 1,000 breakfasts walked in, bringing with him a storm of secrets that could upend everything Leela had planned. Would you like me to continue with the next part? Você disse. Ok, criador de roteiro em inglês disse. Bloque 4, the man at the door, the betrayal, and a choice with teeth. The man who stepped in wore work boots polished by decades of honest scuffing. His jacket was the color of motor oil, his hair a white halo cut close, his jawline a map of stubborn choices. He paused just inside the door, as if the diner and everyone in it had been waiting for him to reach his mark. A folded, bulging envelope rode the pocket over his heart. He scanned the room and locked eyes on Graham first, then Ms. Alvarez. Something like relief warred with suspicion. Owen Hart, he said to the air, voice rough as a battery terminal. I ran the old Hart battery and alternator till the city made me pretend I was a developer. His eyes flicked to Graham again. You, Whitaker? Graham stood. Yes. Owen angled his chin toward Miss Alvarez. You bring him around or he wandered in all on his own. Mrs. Alvarez folded her raincoat over the back of a chair. He's here under summons, she said evenly. Lila's. The name put a fine crack through Owen's composure. He tapped the envelope. Then this is the day. Graham felt heat climb his throat. You knew my wife. Better than most men in suits did, Owen said. He set the envelope on the counter with a thud that bent the metal a fraction. She came by my shop 3 times the spring before. Well, he looked at Ruby and Marta as if measuring how much truth the room could hold. Said she was trying to keep a promise she'd made to a kid who planted collards behind my dumpster. Said if she couldn't stop the big build, she could at least give the block a rib cage. He pushed the envelope toward Graham. She made me a deal. Told me to give you this if you ever showed up with breakfast on your breath and that haunted look in your eyes. Graham took the envelope with hands that had finally stopped shaking. Inside, a photocopy of the deed option he'd just exercised, now annotated in Lila's script, a separate agreement, right of first refusal on the battery lot and the 2 parcels behind it, with Owen's signature and date, and a single-page letter on paper that smelled faintly of the oil and coffee the battery shop had inhaled for 30 years. Graham, it began, because she had planned even for this. Owen says he does not trust men who don't carry pens. You always do. Good start. When the day comes, he will try to give you the land below what it's worth because he likes what we're trying to do. Don't let him. Pay him fair. People don't need saviors. They need neighbors who don't haggle them into gratitude. Beneath it, in Owen's block print, she threatened to haunt me if I lowballed myself. Don't argue with a teacher with excellent handwriting. Owen grunted. She said you'd smirk at that. His gaze sharpened. There's a second part. Less friendly. He pulled out a smaller envelope, its flap sealed with blue painter's tape that made Ruby swallow. A man in a slate blazer came by at 8 this morning with a cashier's check and a smile that didn't involve his eyes. He said he worked for you, wanted me to sell the right of first to a holding company, said if I didn't, I'd lose my spot in the new Aspen of the South. Owen's eyebrows climbed. You send him. Every molecule in the diner looked at Graham. The bell over the door chimed memory. Colin in the slate blazer, hurrying, pressing. Shame and a thin gust of fury moved through him. "No," Graham said. "Steady. I did not." Owen tore open the small envelope and slid out a copy of the check, photocopied onto a sheet where Lila had scrawled months ago, in a parenthetical note. "If a man in a slate blazer shows up with a check, tell him to go learn the names of our cats." Owen snorted. "I don't have a cat, but I borrowed Ruby's brother's, told the man its name was Justice. He didn't laugh." His mouth flattened. "He left this number." He passed over a business card from a shell company with a name as bland as a beige wall, Riverside Growth, LLC. The phone number was Colin's direct line. Miss Alvarez's eyes found Graham's. Testing. "So, are you steering the bulldozer or standing in front of it?" Graham did not look away. "I'm pulling the keys," he said. He texted Colin, "Stand down, no more contacts. If you've moved on Riverside Growth without board authorization, we will speak at 10 and you will bring everything." 3 animated dots appeared, then vanished. A call buzzed through. Graham declined it. He placed his phone face down again, a small declaration of what mattered in the next 10 minutes. Marta slid coffee to Owen and Mrs. Alvarez, as if arming them. Ruby hovered between bringing more napkins and anchoring the air. "What else is in there?" she asked, chin toward the envelope's guts. Graham unfolded the annotated map. Lila had drawn the block like a body, arteries labelled as alleys, the garden marked lungs, the diner, jokingly, the heartburn. She'd circled the parcels the land trust needed to keep the neighbourhood's bones from being pried apart, and listed names in the margin with notes. Mrs. Alvarez will out-argue Supreme Court justices. Connor, pastor with a ledger and a backbone. Owen, gruff, fair, likes peach pie. In tiny script at the bottom, "If Graham is reading this, we're either okay or about to be. She did all this while she was—" Ruby couldn't finish the sentence. "While she was living," Miss Alvarez said, borrowing Lila's language, softening the hard edge. Owen tapped the map with a knuckle. "The holding company ain't the only hyena," he said. "There's a bigger dog, Renner Capital." He glanced at Graham. "You know that name? They've been stacking paper behind Riverside and a handful of church hats. If your man in slate was sniffing around me, they're spooked about your deed option, which means you did something right today." The diner's light seemed to sharpen. Renner Capital, Victor Renner, had circled Whitaker Development like a vulture for years. Shaking hands with boards Graham sat on, smiling with too many teeth. Lila had hated him on sight. Ruby's gaze snagged on the storage key gleaming from Graham's pocket. "What about that?" she whispered, almost to the key itself. "Storage 312? Owen's eyes lit with recognition. "Storage right on Riverside, Unit Row 3. Your wife rented one small space there a year ago and told me if anyone but a Whitaker opened it, the latch would explode with glitter." He chuckled. "She had a mean streak I liked." Graham exhaled. A laugh sketched over ache. "She did." He looked at Ms. Alvarez. "After we file the option and call the land trust, I want you with me to storage right. If there's more to this, I'm not opening it alone." Ms. Alvarez nodded, satisfied at the plural. "Neighbors," she said. "We move in packs." Owen's phone chirped. He pulled it out, squinted, grunted. "Speak of the devil." He held up the screen so Graham and Miss Alvarez could see a text from an unknown number. "We're prepared to exceed any existing offer on your parcels. Cash. Meet now." The signature, V. Renner. Owen typed back with a forefinger that looked like it could snip wire without help. "Meet me at the Bluebird if you like pie." He tucked the phone away and looked up, eyebrow cocked. "No one makes a mess in Marta's house," he said, "but it's fun to watch them try." Marta, from the register, called out without looking, "Whoever bleeds on my floor mops it." "Noted," Owen said, deadpan. Graham felt the old reflex, call legal, circle wagons, weaponize a press release, twitch and subside under Lila's letter's weight. He looked at Ruby. "You still on break?" "I can be—" She glanced at Marta, who waved her away with a rag. "Grab your brother," Graham said. "If he's at the bus stop, bring him pie. Tell him we may need a scout later. People tell the truth to kids." Ruby blinked, then smiled something fierce. "He'll be insufferable with a mission." She hesitated. "You're different now." "I'm trying to be the man she wrote to," he said simply. The bell chattered. A breeze curled in. Victor Renner himself did not stride through the door, but a woman did. Early 30s, hair like ink, suit sharp enough to cut. She flashed a glacier of a smile and announced, "I'm Kimberly Pike, counsel for Renner Capital." Her gaze skimmed the room, dismissed the Formica, landed on Graham. "Mr. Whitaker, your operations chief tells us you're about to make an error that will expose your board to liability. Perhaps we can talk like adults." "Ms." Alvarez rose so slowly it was almost theatrical. "We can talk like neighbors," she corrected. "Adults get themselves into trouble." Kimberly's smile thinned. "Cute. Here's the situation." She placed a folder between the salt and pepper shakers, as if serving a summons with a side of pepper. Riverside Growth has secured purchase agreements on 5 of the 8 target parcels, contingent on the South Slope redevelopment plan proceeding. "If you exercise this," she tapped the notarized option form, which made Marta's eyebrow arch, "you'll trigger a chain reaction we are prepared to contest." Graham flipped the folder open. The agreements were real, printed from DocuSign, several signatures familiar, the barber, the bodega owner. Under each, a clause, void if public interest land trust acquires adjacent Keystone parcel by X date. Lila's handwriting, ghosting his eye, had underlined X on their copy of the option, noon. Today, he had, just minutes ago, beaten the clause by 79 minutes. He looked up, calm settling like snowfall. "You're already too late," he said. Kimberly's eyes cooled another degree. "Then we'll contest the notary." Marta, already holding up her stamped seal like a sheriff's badge, smiled politely. "Ma'am, I've been notarizing longer than you've been cutting your soup with a fork. Sit down before your heel catches on the mat." Ruby bit her lip to hide the grin trying to escape. Owen leaned his elbows on the counter, enjoying the show. Kimberly recalculated. "Very well," she said crisply. "Renner Capital will, as a goodwill gesture, offer an above-market buyout to the land trust for the Keystone parcel, plus a relocation package for any tenants displaced by extraordinary circumstances." She radiated generosity like a searchlight you knew would burn if you touched it. Miss Alvarez's laugh was almost kind. "And in return, you get to turn our block into a brochure." Kimberly tilted her head. "In return, your community gets investment." Graham heard Lila in his ear. "Don't confuse big with good." He placed both palms on the Formica like someone steadying a ship. "We're not for sale," he said. "What we will do is sit down with you, with the city, with the land trust, and discuss a plan that leaves the murals standing and the leases sane. Or you can fight us and lose time and face. Your choice." Kimberly's mouth twitched. "Mr. Whitaker, this high ground won't survive first rain." Her gaze flicked to Owen. "And you, sir, you signed a right of first with him. He's the machine you've been warning your neighbors about." Owen's smile was slow. "Men can be more than one thing. Today he's a neighbor." He tapped the envelope over his heart. He brought breakfast and a promise. Kimberly's phone buzzed. She glanced, frowned. "Excuse me," she said, retreating 2 steps to take the call. Her voice dropped to a viper's whisper. "Victor, he executed. Yes, notarized. No, the clerk's window doesn't close at noon. He can file today. We have a problem." Graham looked at Ms. Alvarez, at Ruby, at Marta and Owen, and the ordinary people who suddenly felt like a council. He heard Lila again. "You did not save me." You can still save something. He felt the shape of the next hours. The county clerk, the land trust office, storage right unit 312 with its glitter trap, click into a route his feet already wanted to take. Kimberly ended her call. "We'll see you in negotiations," she said coolly. "And Mr. Whitaker, your operations chief is concerned about your judgment. He's convening a board meeting at 1. "Excellent," Graham said softly. "I'll bring the community." Kimberly left with a heel click that thought it sounded like thunder. Silence returned like a friend who'd been waiting on the porch. Ms. Alvarez slipped her raincoat back on, though the day was still clear. "We have an hour and change," she said. "Clerk's office first, then storage 312. I like to open secrets before someone else does." Ruby grabbed her notepad and a slice of peach pie wrapped in wax paper, words riding her out of the booth. "I'll get my brother and meet you at the storage place. He's small, but he has the eyes of a detective and the appetite of a hero." Owen clapped Graham's shoulder, a touch like a benediction made of callus. "You keep paying fare," he said. "I'll keep telling Renner to go learn the names of our cats." Graham picked up Lila's tin, the map, the keys. He caught his reflection in the window. Same suit, different spine. They moved toward the door together, Ms. Alvarez at his side. Owen finishing his coffee, Marta holding the fort like a queen in an apron. The bell started its gentle chime, and a familiar silhouette blocked the light. Slate blazer, tight smile. Colin stepped in, a folder under his arm and a thin sheen of sweat shiny at his hairline. He glanced at the tin, the notarized form, Ms. Alvarez's unblinking stare. "We need to talk," he said, trying for command and landing on plea. "Before you do something you can't undo." Graham's fingers tightened around the keys, the metal warm with Lila's instruction. He took a breath that steadied something below the ribs. What he said next, the diner would later say, made the room fall quiet in a new way. "Would you like me to continue with the next part?" Você disse, "Ok, criador de roteiro em inglês." Disse, "Pensou por Saban's Block 5, the confession, the clock, and a door that glittered." "Before you do something you can't undo," Colin said. What he said next, the diner would later say, made the room fall quiet in a new way. Graham didn't sit. Neither did Ms. Alvarez. The tin under Graham's arm felt like a living thing. Colin's gaze ticked across faces, doing math he wished were simple. "I signed Riverside Growth," Colin blurted. The words landed with the dull thud of a tool dropped on concrete. "I used the shell months ago to lock soft commits. We were bleeding time. Renner fronted the escrow to keep them warm. I thought you'd thank me when the board saw momentum." Marta's disrag stilled. Ruby, halfway to the door with the pie, froze so fast the wax paper sighed. Ms. Alvarez's mouth curved, something like pity sharpened to principle. "You sold your boss's shadow," she said, "and now you want him to pretend the sun never rose." Colin's jaw worked. "I didn't sell anything that wasn't already on the table. Graham, you said yourself, South Slope was inevitable. I just accelerated the inevitable." Graham felt the old reflex coil, anger as clean as a blade. He set it down. "You used my name without consent," he said evenly, "and you went to Owen this morning with a check after I told you 10 o'clock. "I went at 8, Colin snapped, desperation fraying the tie of his calm. 2 hours you didn't ask for. We're in a market war, Whitaker. Renner promised bridge financing and insulation from the blowback. You're not the only one grieving. I lost my father last year and still made payroll while you went dark." The room gathered around that small truth. Ruby's eyes softened and then steadied. "Grief doesn't deputize you to bulldoze strangers," she said quietly. Colin's gaze flicked to her, to the bandana, the name tag. "I'm not taking ethics lessons from a waitress," he snapped, then saw the flinch, heard himself, and looked like he wished he could swallow the sentence whole. Graham's voice cooled to something surgical. "You will apologize to her. Colin exhaled, shame climbing like heat. I'm sorry, he managed toward Ruby. The word honest, even if it scraped his throat. Ruby nodded once. Thank you, Graham continued, unblinking. At 1 o'clock you can explain to the board why Riverside Growth was acting for you without a resolution. Bring every document, every email. If Renner promised insulation, he can come stand under the heat with you. Colin swallowed. Renner will make this ugly. Ms. Alvarez smiled without humor. He already sent his lawyer for pie. Colin's eyes found the notarized form again. The math finished running. You executed the option. It wasn't a question. I did. Graham checked the wall clock. 10:53. And we're headed to file it before we do anything else. Don't do this, Colin said. Last card turned face up. You will lose donors. The hospital gala, the alumni fund. People like Renner, give to those. Graham thought of Lila's 5 words. Stop the South Slope project. He pictured the mural, hands lifting a bluebird, and the garden Lila called lungs. When he spoke, his voice felt like something that had finally found its true frequency. Then I'll find people who give to places, not parties. Colin stood very still, weighing which future let him keep more of himself. 1 o'clock, he said at last. Hollow. Don't be late. He left, slate blazer cutting a narrow wake through ordinary air. Silence settled back into its booth. Mrs. Alvarez tapped the tin door. Clark, she said, and then the glitter door. Owen pushed back his stool. I'll follow in the truck. If Renner shows up again, I'll tell him I'm allergic to money that smells like bleach. They moved fast. The courthouse steps in downtown Asheville were hot under the noon-hungry sun, the columns throwing long, solemn shadows like watchmen. Inside, the clerk's counter was a ridgeline of manila and habit. A clerk with a nameplate reading Nayseer looked up, saw Ms. Alvarez, and smiled with the contained relief people wear when the cavalry arrives wearing sensible shoes. Recording, he asked. Recording, Miss Alvarez affirmed, sliding the packet forward like a chess move already thought through 3 turns. Option exercise, land trust coordination memo, notary cert. We brought sandwiches once when the copier died. Remember us fondly. Nasir chuckled, eyes on the seals and signatures. Everything clean, he murmured, stamping, scanning, stacking. The thwack of the stamp sounded like a door locking in the right direction. He slid a receipt across, filed at 11:21 a.m. Congratulations, you just made my lunchtime less boring. Graham let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. The relief wasn't triumph, it was alignment, the click of bone into socket. He texted a photo of the receipt to Colin, filed, see you at 1, bring Renner if he insists. Then to Marta, done, tell Ruby we're heading to storage right. A reply bloomed instantly, already there. Detective plus Pie, awaiting orders. She added a photo of a boy in a school hoodie holding a fork like a sword. They drove to the storage facility on Riverside, flats of corrugated metal glittering in the mountain sun, each unit like a small secret someone forgot to outgrow. Ruby waved them in from under the shade of a unit's roll-up lip, her brother Eli at her side, with peach filling at the corner of his grin. We didn't open it, Ruby reported, proud of a promise kept. But it's humming. Humming? Graham asked. Lila, Miss Alvarez said, as if that explained physics. Open the door. Unit 312 wore its brass latch like a brooch. Graham slid the key in. The lock turned with a sound like a throat clearing. The roll-up door shuddered and then soared, spilling cool air and the scent of paper and cedar mothballs. The first thing they saw was exactly what Owen had predicted. A glitter trap wired to the inside of the frame, a tiny confetti cannon aimed at the person yanking too hard without the key. Ruby clapped a hand over her mouth, laughing and crying at once. Eli whispered, awed, she was a genius. Inside, the unit was a shrine to rigorous care. Banker's boxes stacked 3 high, each labeled in Lila's hand, neighbors' stories, press, assets, finances, receipts, South Slope, alternatives. On a folding table, a laptop sat with a sticky note on its lid. Password is our first road trip destination minus vowels. Eli can't guess it. He cheats. Eli put a hand over his heart, mortally offended. Graham ran his fingers over the labels the way a blind man learns a face. He opened the box marked Neighbors, Stories. Inside, index cards and photos, Mr. Patel in his barber shop, a toddler in the community garden biting a cucumber too big for her mouth. Ms. Alvarez younger and just as unafraid. Each card held a story in 3 lines, facts braided to feeling. Lila had done what she always did, made numbers human. Ruby tugged a second lid, finances, receipts. "Oh," she breathed, pulling free a color-coded ledger, tabs bristling like feathers. She tracked who Renner's Shells paid filing fees for, and who donated to which city council race, cross-referenced with permit approvals. She looked up, a little sick, a little thrilled. This is a map. Ms. Alvarez's jaw set. "It's a shield," she said, "and a mirror." Graham reached for South Slope, alternatives. Inside, architectural sketches not by his firm, modest, elegant, human-scaled. A page labeled Phased Rehab with grant programs circled, timelines scribbled, a note. "Ask Gretchen at DOE about the heat pump pilot. Tell her we have elders who don't like winter." Another sticky, "Graham, if you're reading this, you get to be the man who says no to the shiny thing and yes to the durable thing. It will itch. Scratching is allowed." Eli, who had been quietly orbiting, pointed at a bright orange envelope duct-taped to the back wall for when Renner arrives in person. Ruby's eyes widened. "Foreshadowing," she whispered. Graham peeled it down. Inside, a USB labeled Renner, promises verse, permits, and a single printed email, Victor Renner to Kimberly Pike, CCing Colin, discussing pre-clearing demo permits with friends at City, and getting Whitaker to bless the rendering so the optics soften. The date stamp sat like a nailhead waiting for a hammer. Colin's reply, "Graham will come around. He always does." Lila's pen had underlined that. In the margin, "He won't." The air changed. A pressure drop before a storm. Tires gravelled outside. Eli peeked around the lip of the unit and hissed, "Convertible. Hair like a hawk." Mrs. Alvarez arched an eyebrow. "Renner." Graham felt the tremor and found steadiness under it. He closed the orange envelope, slid the USB into his pocket, and looked at the people around him. Ruby's fierce softness, Eli's delighted outrage, Ms. Alvarez's granite grace. He thought of the board at one, of a town that would hear whatever story was told the loudest. Footsteps crunched. A shadow cut the sunlight at the threshold. A voice, smooth as a sales brochure, sailed in. "Mr. Whitaker, I hear congratulations are in order. Shall we discuss how adults fix detours?" Graham turned toward the door, Lila's map at his back, her boxes like witnesses, and what he said to Victor Renner, under the hum of a glitter trap and the tick of a noon-bound clock, would set the tone for every negotiation to come. "Would you like me to continue with the next part?" "Você disse. Ok, criador de roteiro em inglês disse. Block 6, Renner at the threshold, leverage with a pulse, and a boardroom door opening. Victor Renner filled the mouth of the unit the way a billboard fills a skyline, too slick, too certain, aviators, shirt open half a button too far. The storage corridor brightened behind him like he had paid the sun to follow. Kimberly hovered 2 paces back, phone already open to the war room in her head. "Mr. Whitaker?" Renner purred, not stepping inside. "A shame about the option. We could have done something iconic together. But all is not lost. I specialize in difficult salvations." Graham didn't move away from the folding table. Behind him, Lila's boxes glowed like stained glass. Mrs. Alvarez stood to his left, unimpressed as an oak. Ruby and Eli flanked the door from the shade, a small, ferocious honor guard. "You came to buy a neighborhood," Graham said. "We came to keep it." Renner's smile widened. "Let's not romanticize. People want good schools and safer streets. Investment brings both. I'm offering jobs, taxes, a park with real trees instead of weeds." "People want leases they can pay after a bad month," Miss Alvarez replied, "and a park that belongs to them when the ribbon is cut." Kimberly's gaze flicked past Graham to the orange envelope now retaped to the wall. "You went digging," she said softly. "Careful with stolen documents, Mr. Whitaker. Courts dislike heroes with dirty hands." "They came from my wife's unit," Graham said. "Not stolen. Prepared." Renner's hand tipped palm up, salesman and savior. "Victor, then. We both know cities evolve." Victor to Graham. "You can shepherd that evolution and claim a legacy, or you can gum up the works, look small, and lose your donors when this turns into a circus." He nodded toward the boxes. "Wife's last wishes make wonderful PR, but they rarely withstand math." Graham felt the familiar tug toward the clean hallway of numbers. Lila's handwriting pulsed under his palm, the map of arteries and lungs. He let silence lengthen until Renner twitched. "My wife did math," Graham said finally. "She mapped the grants, the phased rehab, the operating budgets. The only line she couldn't balance was how much greed costs a block after the ribbon falls." Renner leaned one shoulder against the frame, careful of the glitter rig he'd clocked on arrival. "Here's my offer. You keep your option piece, pose for a photo about preserving history, and let Riverside, our friends, proceed on the 5 parcels under contract. We sign a community benefits agreement, small business incubators, some affordable units, 15% set aside, deep as I can go without lighting my LPs on fire. Your board applauds, the paper runs a smiling photo, and this dreary facility stops humming." Eli stepped forward until Ruby's hand snagged his hoodie. 15% is what you give when you don't mean it," he said, eyes narrow with kid-logic justice. Renner blinked, unaccustomed to being cross-examined by someone shorter than his briefcase. Graham kept his voice even. 51% permanently affordable, land trust stewardship on title, no demo of the mural wall or the garden, commercial rents capped to median. Your renderings get smaller and kinder. My firm will redirect capital to rehab energy and code work. And you drop Riverside growth and any attempt to buy around the edges through church hats. In return, we go to the board together and call it a pivot, not a defeat." Kimberly actually laughed. 51? You're describing charity." "I'm describing a neighborhood that survives the photo," Miss Alvarez said. Renner's smile thinned. "You don't have the votes," he said to Graham, voice still friendly but hollowing. "Your man in the slate blazer is convening a meeting. The donors like towers." "I have a filed option," Graham replied, sliding the clerk's stamped receipt across the table like a chess piece Lila had carved. "I have Owen's right of first. I have a community land trust that knows how to speak into microphones, and I have this." He lifted the orange envelope. "Emails proving you pre-cleared permits, and used a shell to backdoor a play through my employee." Kimberly's eyes flickered over the date stamps. Her calculations spiked. She masked it. Circumstantial. Eli, unable to help himself, fluttered a handful of glitter from the tiny cannon. A sunburst of confetti drifted like a slow-motion rebuttal. Renner flinched back a fraction, actually human for a beat. "You wanted adults," Graham said. "Adults sign agreements they're willing to read in front of neighbors. Here are our terms." He slid a one-page sheet across, a précis compiled from Lila's cards and Ms. Alvarez's experience. "We bring this to the board at 1. We bring the land trust and the press kit. If you won't walk with us, you can fight the mural, the papers, and your own email. Your runway will be longer than ours. Your landing will be rougher." Renner looked at the page as if it might stain. Then he looked at Graham, really looked, past the suit to the steadiness in the man, past the grief to the engine running underneath. He seemed to be weighing whether the performance of generosity might be cheaper than the optics of war. 40%, Renner said at last, with a reversion clause at year 25. 51, Mrs. Alvarez said. Perpetual. 45, 30 years, Kimberly counted, even as she texted furiously with a thumb. 51 perpetuity, Graham repeated. You get nameplate credit on rehab financing, not on people's doorways. Renner's jaw flexed. He glanced past them into the unit, taking in what Lila had built, story, proof, light. For a second, a nick in the armor showed, a man remembering a bakery on a street his company knocked flat a decade ago, a woman who stopped smiling after the crane. It passed. You're asking me to lose, he said softly. I'm asking you to win at the right thing, Graham said. Silence held. Outside, a truck downshifted on Riverside like a low chord. Renner folded the paper, slid it into his pocket. 1 o'clock, he said. We'll see which story the city likes better. He turned to go, then paused at the glitter rig, eyes crinkling despite himself. She had a mean streak, he said. She had a precise streak, Graham corrected. She just aimed well. Renner and Kimberly retreated, their retreat practiced as an entrance. The corridor exhaled. Ruby whooped softly, half laugh, half battle cry, Ms. Alvarez squeezed Graham's forearm, a rare intimacy. You found your spine, she murmured. Wear it to the meeting. They packed fast. The press kit thumb drive, the annotated map, a curated set of neighbor stories, Mr. Patel's photo, the toddler with the cucumber, the mural. Ruby tucked the glitter cannon back into place, just in case adult men forgot to knock. Eli asked, Can I come to the board thing? Ruby shook her head. Ms. Alvarez considered, then nodded at Graham. He's a witness, she said, not in the room, in the hall, to remind us who the math is for. They moved as a small procession back into sun, keys, tin, boxes, the ordinary miraculous weight of intention. On the drive to Whitaker Development, Asheville sprawled soft in summer light, the mountains shouldering the sky like old friends. Graham could feel Lila in the passenger seat, knee tucked under her, saying, Don't overcook Whitaker. He didn't. He let the plans stay tender, flexible, breathing. The boardroom at 1 had glass that pretended to disappear and a table that wanted to be a runway. Donors' photos marched along the wall in tasteful frames. Collins stood near the head, pale, a stack of binders his shield. 3 directors whispered by the window. 2 more checked watches like devout men consult prayer beads. Renner arrived on time, smile reset, Kimberly at his shoulder with a binder labeled Partnership Framework, in a font that assumed the answer was yes. Graham set Lila's tin in the center of the table like a heart placed back in a chest. He didn't sit. Miss Alvarez took a chair not at the table but against the wall, where the public usually waits to be invited. Ruby and Eli stood in the hallway within sight of the glass, pie crumbs like glitter at the edge of their shoes. Owen texted, in lobby, belt tightened. If they try to sell me my name, I'll auction my stubbornness. The chair, a man with a jaw that had memorized compromise, cleared his throat. Graham, he said, we're concerned. His eyes flicked to Renner, then back. Help us understand what you've done. Graham glanced at the clock, 1:02. He placed the option receipt on the table. He placed the neighbors' photos. He placed the terms. Then he lifted Lila's letter. The first page folded back to the line that had turned his morning. I'm going to start, he said, voice steady as the mountain line, with a note my wife left at a diner. Then we're going to talk about math. He began to read. And the next thing that happened, who walked in, which side they took, and which story the board chose to hear, would decide the fate of South Slope and the promise Lila made with breakfast. Would you like me to continue with the next part? Você disse. Ok, criador de roteiro em inglês disse. Block 7. The board hears a diner, and the math learns a heartbeat. He began to read. Please serve him his usual. Tell him it's on me. The boardroom, the glass, the quiet carpet, the table that mistook itself for a runway, tilted a fraction, as if the floor had remembered gravity. One director, a woman with a bob cut precise as a metronome, folded her hands tighter. Another, a man whose tie always advertised certainty, cleared his throat and failed to find a sound. Graham didn't hurry. He let the note breathe in the room that had made a sport of suffocating nuance. He set Lila's letter beside the stamped receipt, then laid out the neighbor's photographs with the care of a man unfurling maps before a storm. Mr. Patel, he said, tapping the barber with his grandson in his lap. Ms. Alvarez's garden. This child who thinks cucumbers should be the size of courage. A smile ghosted the chair's mouth and vanished before it could be counted. Brenner leaned back, untroubled, fingers templed. Kimberly's pen weighted like a javelin. Colin watched the table edge like it might offer him absolution if he stared hard enough. We're not here to sentimentalize breakfast, Graham said, voice steady, but to decide what kind of builders we are. He pushed a single sheet to the center. Terms for a South Slope pivot. 51% permanently affordable, land trust stewardship, no demolition of the mural or garden, capped commercial rents, rehab first capital. This is the math that lets the morning after the ribbon look like the morning of. The director with the metronome bob, Dr. Elaine Chen, a pediatrician whose patients held neighborhoods together between checkups, cleared her throat. And the financing? Graham lifted a folder from the tin. Phased rehab, he said. Federal historic credits, state rehab incentives, heat pump pilot MIMS. Alvarez already has a line into mission capital lining up. He nodded toward the hallway glass, where Ruby and Eli stood like punctuation marks the room had never used. Also a press kit. Also a town. Tie man. Harold Denton, the kind of donor who considered his own generosity a teachable moment, lifted a palm. With respect, community emotion doesn't fix a pro forma. Victor's framework does. Tower's pencil. Sentiment doesn't. Renner's smile said, see. He slid his partnership framework forward like a dessert you pretend you don't want. 40 floors of certainty. A park with trees that already looked domesticated. 15% workforce affordable, the way a shrug is polite. We're prepared to write 7 figures into your annual foundation commitments, he said pleasantly. Your hospital wing could use a second plaque. Ms. Alvarez, from her chair against the wall, didn't bother to stand. Plaques don't shelter anybody, she said. Harold's eyes cooled. And slogans don't balance budgets. Graham didn't flinch. Then let's balance it. He clicked the thumb drive into the room's display. Lila's folders bloomed on the screen. Alternatives, neighbors, permits, color-coded with the order of a woman who believed chaos could be persuaded to behave if you labeled it kindly enough. This is not a slogan, he said, opening alternatives. It's a sequence. Kimberly's eyebrow hitched, amusement and annoyance courting. Nice slide deck, but you still have a governance problem, Graham. Your operations chief pursued Riverside growth quite effectively. You can't pivot on a promise and a PowerPoint. Colin's jaw tightened, then loosened. Shame, loud and useful, crawled up his throat. I used a shell, he said, voice quiet enough the carpet leaned in. Renner fronted escrow. I told myself I was saving us. I was saving me, he swallowed. I didn't ask. I'm sorry. The admission landed like rain on hot pavement. Steam, then the smell of something truer. Dr. Chen turned to Colin, not unkind. Can you steer a pivot? He looked at Graham. If he leads, I'll follow. If he doesn't, I'll resign. Renner's smile thinned. "Before we canonize contrition," he said lightly, "perhaps look at what your friends have been doing while you invented ethics." He nodded to Kimberly, who slid a stack of signed purchase agreements across the table. 5 contingent contracts. Ours. Your option complicates. It doesn't cancel. If you want this neighborhood to survive the photo, you'll need someone who knows how to thread needles in City Hall. He tapped his own chest. "Or, Miss," Alvarez said, "someone who knows how to look a council member in the eye without promising their cousin a job." Kimberly's pen stilled. "Accusations are cheap. Receipts aren't," Ruby said from the hall before Graham could stop her. The words hot with a waitress's courage at the end of a long shift. She held up a ledger through the glass. "We have cross-referenced permits with your friends. Lila did your homework for you." Harold bristled. "We do not take public testimony through glass." The glass door swung open. Marta stepped in, apron off, spine unbowed, carrying a single-page letter with the Bluebird's logo in the corner, and ink that had not yet forgiven her for crying on it. "Then take it at the table," she said, setting the letter beside the terms. "She wrote this for you, Mr. Denton, and for you, Mr. Chair, because she knew the day might come when the word inevitable would need a shorter leash." The chair frowned, then read. The boardroom softened as Lila's hand entered, writing to men who had never been spoken to like neighbors in this room. "If you are reading this, you are choosing between speed and memory. I'm not asking you to feel, I'm asking you to notice. Notice who stands to leave and who will never be invited in. Notice whether your grandchildren will know the barber's name. If you want legacy, make a decision you'd want a kid to sit in and feel safe. Silence, the good kind, seeded the air." Dr. Chen's eyes brightened and then disciplined themselves. Harold Denton stared at a point a foot beyond the paper, considering the weight of his own story and the story he'd fund. Renner recovered first, a professional at interrupting tenderness with calculus. "It's noon," he said. "You have a fiduciary duty. Choose the framework that protects your donors and your timeline." Graham lifted the orange envelope. "And your duty," he said, "includes protecting this organization from reckless exposure." He slid the printed email to the chair, Renner to Kimberly, CCing Colin, about pre-clearing demos with friends at City, and getting Whitaker to bless renderings so the optics soften. Date stamps like nails. The chair read once, read again, and finally looked up at Renner with a weariness that had parented 2 teenagers and run 3 capital campaigns. "Victor," he said quietly, "do not mistake our politeness for permission." Renner's gaze flicked to Colin, then to the ceiling, where power liked to pretend it lived. "We can litigate any narrative," he said. "We can live this one," Dr. Chen answered. The chair exhaled, finding the tenor of a gavel he hadn't intended to drop today. "Motion," he said, voice steadier than the room deserved. "To pause demolition-related actions on South Slope. To authorize Whitaker Development to pursue the community-led pivot outlined here, including land trust, stewardship and affordability thresholds, and to empanel a joint working group with neighbors, Renner Capital and the city." He looked to Harold. "Second," Harold Denton looked at the faces through the glass. A boy with glitter at his sneaker, a waitress whose hands could carry 12 plates and still hold a promise, a woman who had been called angry when what she was accurate. He pinched the bridge of his nose. A man remembering a barber shop his father loved and a bakery that had been killed by a crane he helped fund. "Second," he said, surprising himself into a better version of his own name. Renner's jaw flexed. Kimberly's pen didn't move. "All in favor?" the chair asked. Hands rose. "Dr. Chen, yes." The young director who never spoke, "Yes." Harold, "Yes." One more, a cautious yes. One, abstain. One no, the man who measured compassion in quarter points. The chair looked at Graham, then at Lila's tin, then at the neighbourhood staring back through glass. "Aye," he said softly. The motion carried. For a second, the room did nothing, like a body registering a heartbeat it had ignored. Then breath returned. Ms. Alvarez's shoulders dropped a half-inch. Ruby pressed her forehead to the glass and laughed a small, astonished laugh. Eli raised both hands like a ref who'd finally seen a fair call. Marta exhaled a prayer, shaped like a pie recipe. Renner didn't flinch. "We'll negotiate," he said, "and we will make you pay for every inch you think you gained today." Ms. Alvarez stood now, finally, not tall in inches, but in fact, "We'll pay in meetings and patience," she said, "not in neighbours." The chair rapped the table gently. "Working group convenes tomorrow, 9 a.m. Ms. Alvarez, Mr. Renner, Mr. Whitaker, you'll each name 2 delegates." He paused, then added, almost shy, "And we'll need coffee." "Bluebird will bring it," Marta said. Papers shuffled. Armour was reclaimed. The choreography of retreat began. Colin lingered. "Graham," he said, voice low, "I'll face whatever consequence you hand me, but thank you for not letting me be my worst choice." "Do the work," Graham said. "That's the apology." The room emptied in the slow swirl of aftershocks. Graham stood alone with the tin for a beat, the buzz of victory fragile and new. He looked down. Between Lila's cards lay an envelope he hadn't seen. Thin, cream, his name on it with a curl she only used when she was bracing him and kissing him at once. On the back, "Open when you remember you are not alone." He slid a finger under the flap. And what he read next bent his knees and changed the way he would love the rest of his life. "Would you like me to continue with the next part?" Você disse, "Ok, criador de roteiro em inglês disse. Pensou por Kings's Block 8, the last envelope, a softer future, and breakfast paid forward." He slid a finger under the flap, paper sighing like a door that had waited, and unfolded the thin, cream letter. Lila's handwriting leaned toward him, familiar as a porch light. "Graham, love, if you are reading this, it means you remember to eat before you remember to argue. Good. Keep doing that. There are 3 things I need you to know, and 1 thing I'm asking you to do. First, you did not fail me. You were the morning I got to keep when nights got loud. Do not build penance. Build places where people don't have to apologize for being human. Second, forgive yourself out loud, not because anyone requires it, but because silence grows mold on the truth. Tell the girl with the red bandana you were cruel. Then hire her courage. It's what your company is missing. Third, there is more than one kind of legacy. Plaques tarnish. Porches don't. Choose porches. Now the ask. On our anniversary each year, go to the Bluebird at opening and pay for every breakfast until noon. Don't leave your name. Tell Marta it's from the woman who believed hash browns could keep promises. Then, at dusk, walk to South Slope and listen. If you can hear the garden breathe, you're doing it right. P.S. In storage 312, bottom of the box marked Alternatives, there's a small blue pouch. It's for when you are ready to stop wearing grief like a uniform. You'll know the day. Don't overcook it. His knees bent. The chair found him. The room that had made a habit of steel softened. Outside the glass, Ruby's face blurred, then came into focus through tears she didn't wipe. Ms. Alvarez looked away, an act of privacy disguised as looking at the ceiling. Graham laughed, wet, astonished. "Porches," he said to no one and to everyone. He looked at Ruby through the glass. "You're hired," he mouthed, and watched her blink at the audacity and then grin like a match catching. Eli pumped a fist, glitter winking at his knuckles. The next day began to happen before the current one finished. The working group met at 9 in a borrowed church hall that smelled like coffee and floors, recently mopped by someone with opinions. Renner showed up smiling like a man who'd read 3 versions of the same bad review and learned to quote the best line. Kimberly's binder had a new tab, Community Terms, Ms. Alvarez brought a stack of leases and a jar of garden mint. She set the mint in the center of the table and said, "So we remember what we're saving." Graham brought Lila's map and the press kit, each story like a compass. Colin arrived without armor. He took notes like a man rebuilding a language. The dance was long, numbers and no's, and the ache of compromise that wasn't capitulation, but the frame held 51% permanently affordable, perpetuity, not a landlord's memory. Land trust stewardship locked to title, rehab first capital. The mural would remain, so would the garden. Commercial leases pegged to something human. A clause no one in a slate blazer had ever written without choking, neighbors' council veto on any change that smells like shrink-wrapped generosity. They signed a memorandum of understanding not with a ribbon, but with a shared silence that felt like standing on a porch at dusk, listening for the garden to breathe. Days turned into a sequence. The county clerk blessed filings. The land trust opened an office in a rehabbed brick with windows that finally lived up to their shape. Owen let himself be paid fair and brought peach pie to the signing like a sacrament. Marta stuck the first lease on the diner's bulletin board, next to a lost cat flyer and a hand-drawn invitation to a block potluck. The bluebird's bell kept jingling, and some mornings the hush of a story started at a corner booth, where a philanthropist once learned how to be a neighbor. And because Lila had written it into the marrow of the plan, Graham began to change the shape of his days. He put away 3 of his suits and bought 2 shirts that didn't look like decisions. He told the board the company would undergo an audit of its shells, and then he did not flinch when the audit told him what he already knew. He asked Ruby to build Whitaker Development's first community desk and pay her like the professional she had been all along. "It's a title you can't put on a business card," he told her, handing over a badge anyway. "You notice when the coffee burns." Ruby cried on the badge and then laughed at herself for crying. "Eli says titles are just capes," she said. "I think I want one that doesn't snag on door handles." On their anniversary, he rose at dawn, stood on Haywood Road while the Bluebird's neon yawned awake, and placed his card on the counter. "Until noon," he told Marta. From the thin woman who believed hash browns keep promises, Marta didn't cry. She polished the coffee machine like a mirror and nodded at the corner booth Lila had named For Wreckage, and which, lately, had been hosting repair. Before dusk that same day, he went to Storage 312. The unit still hummed because the glitter trap delighted itself. He knelt at the box marked Alternatives, lifted the lid, and found the small blue pouch taped to the underside like a secret that had learned patience. Inside, a wedding band, his, the one he'd lost in the hospital laundry and pretended he hadn't. A silver key to a bungalow Lila had quietly put a deposit on 2 streets off the block, and a note. "For whoever you become when you remember you are allowed to laugh." He did not put the ring back on. Love, he was learning, had more than one godly shape. He put the key on his chain, felt its small cool against his chest, and imagined a porch he hadn't earned yet. He stepped outside as the sky turned the color of a grapefruit's tenderest slice. Over South Slope, the ridgeline held still like a guardian who accepted no plaques. Somewhere a kid practiced trumpet exactly as if the neighborhood depended on it. The garden breathed. He heard it. Renner sometimes sat on the edges of meetings with a look Graham began to understand. A man learning that winning at the wrong thing had been costing him sleep. Kimberly, freed from the burden of being the sharpest in any room, started smiling like someone whose ethics had finally caught up with her wit. Colin did the work. He discovered he was good at walking blueprints through city halls without losing his temper. He apologized 3 times, once to Ruby, once to Owen, once to himself. All three took, at the Bluebird, regulars learned to stop staring when a widower laughed. Out by the mural, the kids painted a new element, a hand releasing a bluebird instead of gripping it, the bird's wings touching the corner where the garden's fence began. On the first day, the Land Trust signed titles. Marta hung a paper chain across the diner that said, "Porches in letters, cut from old menus." "We ran out of capital P's," she confessed. "Miss Alvarez says lowercase porches work just as well." Months later, at a small ribbon that wasn't a ribbon, Graham stood with neighbors on a stoop that didn't exist before. The press asked for a quote. He said, "We misread big for good. We're learning small can be enormous. We chose to be neighbors." He looked past microphones to where Ruby was showing Eli how to read a lease like a comic book, and to where Ms. Alvarez was arguing affectionately with Owen about the best way to anchor a railing into century-old brick. The future did not feel overcooked. It felt like something simmering, tended, checked, tasted, adjusted, shared. The diner opened the next morning, same as always. Sun slid through the windows, caught on the rim of a cup, and made a small, ordinary halo. Graham took the stool at the end of the counter out of habit, and because grief, when treated gently enough, finds its seat without making a scene. Ruby set down 2 eggs over medium, wheat toast, hash browns crisp, and a grapefruit that passed Lila's old test. "Your usual," she said, a smile ghosting the words, "not heavy, not a haunt." "On the house today, the girl who used to call me stubborn told me to insist." He touched the edge of the plate, like a man thanking a compass. Around them, the bell chimed, and a Tuesday went on being a Tuesday. But the town's heartbeat was louder, steadier, truer. He ate, not to obey the dead, but to keep faith with the living. When he finished, he left enough cash to fatten the tip jar and a note tucked beneath the grapefruit wedge where the next person might find courage. It said, "You are not alone. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and tell me if you liked this story."